What's going on, people? It's me, TheRealMossi, and I have another Battlefield 3 quick tip for you. This time I'm going to show you how to get to the chopper like Arnold. Yep, it's going to be all about helicopters today. I'm going to show you some of the best attack helicopter setups for different situations, so let's get started. Before we start with the setups, let's look at all the options we have and where they all fit in. Alright, I'm not going to go over every single one of these right now because I'm guessing that you guys already know what most of these do, but I will go over some of them in detail later on when I'm actually talking about the setups. The pilot and the gunner have different options. We're going to start with the pilot, and here are the options for the vehicle upgrade slot for the pilot. In the brackets you can see the total amount of experience points required to unlock each of the items. Next is the vehicle gadgets and the vehicle weapons. There's also a permanent upgrade called below radar. This thing doesn't take up one of your 3 slots, and once you unlock it you'll always benefit from its effects when you're the pilot. Now moving on to the gunner. In the vehicle upgrade slot we have, and in the vehicle gadgets and vehicle weapons. Alright, now let's take a look at the different situations. I have 4 of them. First is general, then aggressive, then defensive, and finally lone wolf. Now before I get into the actual setups, I want to explain the importance of having a gunner. The gunner doesn't just bring extra firepower, he also brings with him upgrades and gadgets that make your vehicle stronger. Communication between the gunner and the pilot is very important, and if you're the gunner, you have to be spotting those enemies. Continuously hit the spot button while you're looking around. It's the select button on the PS3 and the back button on the Xbox 360. So just keep looking around, mash that spot button, and alert the pilot to where the enemies are. All of my setups except the lone wolf work best with a gunner, so always wait for a gunner to jump in before you take off. Alright, let's move on to the setups. We'll start with the basic general setup. This is good for a lot of different situations, but it's not great for any one particular situation. Alright, let's start with the pilot. In the upgrade slot you should have the air radar. This increases the size of your minimap and it exposes any enemy vehicles, both land and air, as well as spawn beacons and other enemy deployed gadgets. In the gadget slot I went with the IR flares. These are one of the first things you unlock. They're very easy to use and they're very useful. In the weapon slot I went with the heat seekers because that's the only choice you have. Now moving on to the gunner. The gunner has to complement the pilot. The gunner setup has to make up for the weaknesses in the pilot setup. So with that in mind, let's go to the upgrade slot. We'll go with stealth here. This increases the lock-on time for the enemy and it gives your pilot some time to replenish the flares. In the gadget slot, either go with zoom or thermal depending on what you have unlocked. Zoom is best for shooting down aircrafts, while thermal is best for spotting and taking down land vehicles and foot soldiers. In the weapon slot, go with the guided missile. This targets and locks on to land vehicles. Once locked on, it's almost a sure hit. Now let's move on to the aggressive setup. This is best used when the enemy team you're going up against is not very good. They're not using their AA rockets to take down your air support, and their air support is weak. In this situation you want to cause as much damage as possible. You want to hit them hard and you're not worried too much about defending yourself. If you're lucky enough to find yourself in this situation, here's a setup you should go with. Starting with the pilot, you want to use air radar again to spot the enemy vehicles quickly and take them out as soon as possible. For the gadget, you should go with the Ecm Jammer because you want to do strafing runs into their base to maximize damage. Turn on your Ecm Jammer just before you go in so they can't lock onto you. It prevents enemy missile lock on for 6 seconds and you have to wait for 10 seconds to use it again. So if you do the math, you'll only be vulnerable for 4 seconds. Please note that this only works to prevent a lock on. If you're already locked onto, the Ecm Jammer does nothing and you will get hit, so just make sure to deploy before the enemy locks onto you. And your weapon should be guided missiles again. Now moving on to the gunner, we have in the upgrade slot the Autoloader. You don't need stealth anymore because you're not too worried about defending yourself right now. The Autoloader allows your primary weapon to reload faster so you can deal out more damage. In the gadget slot, go with thermal optics. In this situation, the pilot should be able to handle the enemy's weak air support. The gunner should focus on the ground troops and vehicles, and the thermal scope is best for this. For the weapon, go with the guided missile, or if you have unlocked it, go with the TV missile. The TV missile is basically like a Predator missile from Call of Duty. You can control it and guide it wherever you want to go, and it doesn't require a lock-on. Okay, moving on to the defensive setup. This is exactly the opposite of the aggressive situation. Here, the enemy is very good at taking out air support, and their air support is also killer. You'll have to be a lot more cautious and defensive now. Starting with the pilot, in the upgrade section you want to have maintenance now, because you're going to be getting hit a lot. Maintenance allows you to recover faster from damage, but it only works if your health is above 50%. Air radar might also be useful to expose enemy air support, but since the gunner will be more focused on defense, he'll be doing a lot more spotting for you, so you might not need it. For the gadget, use the Ecm Jammer. I'll explain the strategy in a bit. For the weapon, again, the guided missile. Now for the gunner. The gunner's role is almost completely defensive now. You can still shoot stuff, but your focus is on defense and spotting. So for your upgrade slot, use stealth, make it harder for the enemy to lock on. For your gadget, use flares. Alright, here's the strategy. The flares work really well with the pilot's Ecm Jammer. You have to communicate for this. The gunner will pop the flares when you're locked onto, then the pilot uses the Ecm Jammer to prevent further lock on, and this gives time for your flares to cool down. Keep repeating this and it'll be nearly impossible for the enemy soldiers and aircrafts to actually take you down with AA missiles. And for the weapons, go with the guided missile. The guided missile works better than the TV missile in this situation since you have to be more focused on defense and spotting. You won't have time to control the TV missile if you have that equipped. Alright, let's move on to the lone wolf setup. This is a situation where you don't have a gunner. You can't get the benefits of the extra gadgets and upgrades. In this case, the pilot setup has to be well-rounded and a bit more defensive oriented than the general setup. So here's the setup for the pilot. For the upgrade slot, you have to go with stealth because you don't have the gunner to give you stealth. And if you don't have stealth, you're gonna have a hard time escaping before the enemy's second lock on. Alright, for the gadgets, you can either go with flares or the Ecm Jammer. If you're a beginner, you should go with the flares. You'll have a lot of different things to focus on now that you don't have a gunner by your side. Flares are simpler to operate and they're effective whether or not you're locked onto. But with the Ecm Jammer, if they happen to get a lock on you, you're pretty much screwed. But if you're an experienced player who can handle the timing of the Ecm Jammer on your own, then go for it. In the right hands, the Ecm Jammer is a lot more useful than flares. And for your weapons, guided missiles again. Now if you can avoid the lone wolf setup, I suggest you do, because it's a lot weaker than the other three setups. It's always better to have a gunner, so just wait and ask somebody to jump into the gunner seat before you take off. Before I finish up, I have another Ecm Jammer strategy, using the below radar upgrade with the Ecm Jammer. Below radar, like I said before, is a permanent upgrade, meaning that it doesn't take up one of the three slots. Once you unlock it, you'll always benefit from it when you're the pilot. You don't have to equip it. It prevents the enemy from locking onto your chopper when you're flying at low altitudes. This works really well with the Ecm Jammer. The Ecm Jammer works for 6 seconds and requires 10 seconds to cool down after it's deployed. So you'll be vulnerable to enemy AA lock-on for 4 seconds. But since you have the below radar upgrade, you can fly low for those 4 seconds and make it virtually impossible for the enemy to lock onto you. This requires some skill and good timing, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be a lot more effective with the chopper even when you don't have a gunner. Alright guys, I hope these tips will make you want to get to the chopper more often, stay alive in the chopper longer, and cause more damage to your enemies. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe if you want more. Thanks again. I am TheRealMossi. Tell your friends about me.